Hey, Wargamers. Thanks for joining us. I'm here today with Rob from Preferred Enemies.
How's it going?
Hey, thanks. Lots of people ask me what are my favorite podcasts, and Preferred Enemies is one that I make sure to download as soon as it's available. So
Thank
I'm
you.
very happy to have Rob here with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Rob, just for people that aren't as in the know as I am, and that don't have the exclusive access to Preferred Enemies podcast, which, by the way, it's not exclusive. Go to iTunes, download it. It's great. Can you tell people a little bit about kind of your overarching goal and what the podcast is?
Well, the podcast, we started a few years ago. I think we're coming up on our 7th anniversary now. But when we first started, our focus was kind of on bringing new players into the game, getting new players up to speed. And while the show has kind of shifted and morphed over the last 7 years, we've kind of gotten more involved in the competitive scene, and we run a GT ourselves. But we've always tried to be that explanatory voice, especially for the newer players, but also we've kind of started engaging a lot with the community, and now that's really kind of become our mission now as a podcast, is to engage with the community. I mean, at our heart, we're still four guys sitting in a basement talking about 40k, and that's something that hasn't changed. But we started getting involved with talking to people who are running other GTs in the Midwest US, and then we started doing listener mail and answering rules questions, and it's just kind of snowballed from there. And so really getting just engaged with the community, but also trying to bring more people into the community, and that's part of the rules question thing, is people who are either like gone from the game, especially with like 8th edition, but even 7th edition, people who had left the game and then were coming back, had questions that, how does this mechanic work? How am I understanding this rule? And it just has kind of gone from there. But that's always been kind of our central goal, has been, making the game accessible to more people.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I love about your show, is that it does really focus on the community, and it's not. It comes off as very authentic too, and I'm sure it is actually authentic. It's not a guise, but if it is, you're very good actors. But it comes off as very authentic, and you guys work seemingly very, very diligently to make sure that it's an inclusive and community building show. And one of the things that I am curious about is, how are you going about consciously building a more inclusive community? One thing that you've done in the past is working with like Warhammer 40k couple, and trying to make sure that women are included in the community to the extent possible. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Like one thing we've noticed about, as we've gone through and started going to larger events and talking with more people, is that while we see a lot of people at these events, the wargaming community overall is actually a relatively small one. I mean, at any given, like, you look at the numbers, like at our local store, we've got a pretty healthy 40k group going, but we don't have the numbers that like a Magic pre-release will pull. I mean, that's a big community, and 40k being a subfaction, subgroup of a subgroup of the wargaming community, even though it's one of the biggest games, we're still, it's still a small community, and so there's really no room to exclude anyone. And a lot of times people don't exclude people, they don't exclude other people intentionally. We just find that sometimes it's easy to kind of get very insular, because it's you form a group with the same people, and you see them every week playing the same game and seeing the same people when you go to events, and it's really easy to just kind of get locked into that mindset of, this is us, this is our little club, and we don't really have room for that as a community. We need to bring in new blood, which means younger players, and players who otherwise might not have felt comfortable coming in, because they look around, they're like, there's nobody here that looks like me, so I don't know if I feel like I belong. And I think that's one of the missions, one of the voices is, everyone belongs in this hobby. If you can build a mini, paint it, kind of, I mean, that's good. For some people that's good enough. Paint it, yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you can do that, and you can roll, move models around on a table and roll dice, that's all that we need. One thing, like a comparison, I've seen it brought up other places, and we brought it up on our show as well, is if we don't bring new blood into the hobby, we're going to become model trains. And model trains, it's a fun hobby, and there's some beautiful model train tables and everything, but it's not a hobby that a lot of people are growing and actively getting involved in. And we don't want to just become a bunch of old guys sitting around playing with our wargaming models and then when we die or leave the hobby for any reason, it's just gone. And so you have to bring new people in it, and whether that's people with kids who are getting their kids involved. And a lot of us, as we've gotten older, we're becoming parents, we're bringing kids to events because sometimes we just have to, because you sometimes childcare options get tight, and you just have to bring your kid with you, or you want your kid to get involved. I know at one of the local game stores in our area, there's a guy that brings his kid, and his daughter is painting pink Space Marines, and I think that's awesome that she can be part of that hobby. And anybody who's going to say no, she shouldn't be there, you're not helping. And so that's a kid that might get involved in these later. Maybe she won't. But why would you try to put a roadblock in front of somebody who's interested in being part of it? And so that's kind of one of the goals, is to make people, make it open so that anybody can feel welcome. Now, that said, don't be a jerk when you show up and play. I mean, but the goal is to try to get everybody realizing that, hey, as long as we're not jerks to each other, it's all cool.
Right. Yeah. I mean, at the core, this is a game, right? So having more people play the game with us is, theoretically that should be a good thing. So, making artificial filters that prevent that from happening just doesn't quite jive with the mission of the game.
Yeah, and we had an episode where we interviewed Sherilyn Allen, who was the top female player in the ITC, I think 2017, and or maybe in 2016. It's been a while, I think, since the interview, and one of the points she brought up was that a lot of people don't realize that they're setting up those bars to entry, and sometimes it's just the store the store isn't taken care of, or again, people just kind of get into their routine of doing things and not seeing why this might be off-putting to somebody. And so it's just kind of a chance to have those conversations sometimes and say, hey, maybe we should not always do things that way, and try to grow the hobby. And that doesn't necessarily mean grabbing people that aren't interested in pulling them in, but just having an open door policy, basically.
Yeah, I remember that episode. It was I really appreciated it, and it rang true with some of the discussions that I've had with my wife. When we go somewhere, I try to find the local game store and take a look and see what it looks like. And a lot of the comments that I get from her is, if we pull up and it's dimly lit and it's like not a very nice looking store, the comment isn't, oh yeah, let's go in there, that looks fun. It's all right, how long are you going to be?
Exactly. Whereas, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if it's a nice, well lit, clean store with nice amount of space, yeah, we both can go in there, enjoy our time, take our time, and it's just a better experience for everyone. And I think one thing too that you touched on is that people that look like me walking into a game store, we can feel welcomed pretty easily. But if there's something that you don't check one of those boxes, and you go in there and there's something that doesn't look familiar to you, that can be an intimidating thing. And I think that's something that not everyone necessarily gives the appropriate amount of weight to either.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's like simple things like that can make a big difference in growing a community. And again, if you want the game to prosper, we have to grow a good, healthy community, and that's one of the steps you can take.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other, so like how specifically um, do you think that we as a community can grow, and more broadly than just the podcast, how do you see the structures that are basically the infrastructure or the institutions that we've built around the community can help us grow as a community? So what do you see the role of things like GW and friendly local gaming stores and other types of stuff like that? What's their role in that story?
Well, I mean, starting from the top with GW, I think GW's done a really good job over the last couple of years, both with, I know we're mostly talking 40k, but I think also with Age of Sigmar, they've done a really good job of being far more involved and really trying to set out that idea of multiple ways to play the game, trying to lower the bar of initial entry, which was always a huge problem in the past. And they've, by offering a lot of different options and supporting those options and having a more relaxed voice with the community, actually having a voice with the community is a huge difference. I think they've done a really good job in that respect. Obviously, the friendly local game store, especially in the U.S., I don't know how much it's an option in other countries. I know from what I've gleaned, and again, this is my information as an ignorant American sometimes, but that the UK tends to focus more on gaming clubs, and there's not quite as many independent stockists that have room to play. But I know in the US, the friendly local game store is kind of the cornerstone of where people play, especially with the GW stores tending to be on the smaller side, really only having a couple of long tables to play on. So they tend to hold smaller events, whereas the friendly local game stores can hold those events where there's like 10, 15, 20 some people or more, depending on the size of the store. So I think the friendly, the local game store, the independent game store has a very important part to play, because that's where we go to play. And so that's also why I know a lot of people like to do discount shopping online, and I understand the mentality, but there's a very important aspect of supporting your game store and, kind of paying while you play. And a lot of stores these days are offering discounts either on GW product. I mean, they've got a limit on how much they can offer based on their deals with GW, but between that or they'll have, regular customer discounts or things like that, you can still get a decent price on that stuff if that's what you're concerned about. But that, if you don't help support the store, they're going to stop having a place for you to play. So I think it's really important there. And then even like, going on the more competitive side, groups like the ITC had really kept the tournament scene. I mean, you could make you can definitely make the argument that the tournament scene would have continued whether we formed some sort of independent tournament circuit or not, that you would have still had local events and RTTs and stuff, but having a group kind of managing a large number of events from a top level or providing a structure for people to follow, because sometimes that's all people want, or that's the step they're missing, is some sort of guiding force, because it can be intimidating trying to come up with all that stuff yourself. And so having somebody there kind of monitoring balance and putting out FAQs to answer questions in a period when GW really wasn't keeping up on it, and providing missions that they figured, and trying to tweak them and keep them balanced so they'd support more army types. I mean, that was an important thing too, and we were lacking that. And I think it's interesting that since GW has stepped back up to do it in their FAQ game, and I think they've done a really good job there, that the ITC has kind of stepped back from that aspect, but now they're just focused on making balanced tournament missions and providing the tools for people to run events. So that's also very important. So there's there's these multiple levels of how the game is supported, from, like I said, from the top all the way down to the local, and then even to the individual like clubs within friendly local game stores. And I think an important part there for bringing in more people is, again, because GW is supporting all these different ways to play, is having different kinds of events, different kinds of focuses. In fact, our most recent episode, we started off on a conversation about sportsmanship, and then we ended talking about how having the friendly tournament at LVO was a great alternative for people who want to get some game. They go to an event, they want to get games, and they want to meet new people, and they do want to compete, but they're not necessarily interested in the more hardcore beat face style tournament that you'd have at an LVO championship. And so we're really supportive now of having formats like that where you can still, because a lot of people that we know and that we've met when we go to various GTs, you know, yeah, there are people there because they want to be contenders, but there's a lot of people there because, like, this is my first tournament. I'm going just because, hey, I put together an army and I want to get some games in. Or maybe this is like the one time, you know, like the one time I can get like 6 games in a weekend, and that's awesome. And that's it, but that's why they show up. And so having an option that might be a little bit more relaxed might be very much in some people's right up some people's alley. It's also why things like a night joust event is really popular, or combat patrol. Having all those different ways to play that have, again, different levels of entry, different skill levels, different expectations. I mean, that's having that variety is good because you can serve more kinds of players that way rather than just a one size fits all.
And you're not just saying that about the night joust because you guys dominated at Renegade, right?
not just that. That was a fluke. That was a freak occurrence. I don't think it'll ever happen again. It was awesome to happen, but I think it's been awesome seeing night jousts popping up at a lot more events because it's just one of those fun, you know, absolutely relaxed events where just crazy things happen and you just end up you have a great time and you end up cheering for whoever's winning, and even if they're not on your team anymore, and it's just stuff like that. That's it. The events like that are just one of my favorite parts of the 40k hobby because it's just one of those things where you just get into it.
Yeah, and I was actually at the Renegade Night Joust. I was playing in the Combat Patrol tournament, so like ships in the night, we passed each other. But you guys were very close, and you could tell that everyone was having a great time. And it's one of those types of events that no one's going to take. You know, your ego as a gamer is not riding on whether your knight is the last knight standing, right? Like, yeah, people are there for fun, and it's nice that that type of event is specifically designed to work with someone who is just there to have fun. Whereas other types of more competitive events, you know, you can get people that just take it too seriously and get their feelings hurt and, you know, whatever. Like in the latest podcast, you were talking about some instances like that, but
and like I said, I think it's good to support multiple ways to play, and that's something I learned from my card gaming days. I was very much the casual, almost narrative player on some games, and then a lot of players in my area were you know, the very competitive. Every game had to be practicing for a pro tour or the equivalent in whatever game they're playing. And there was a while there where I was that guy that got really frustrated with, I can't get any games in because all these competitive players are ruining everything for me. And I had to kind of step back and get over that and realize they're playing the way they want to have fun. I'm playing the way I want to have fun. Neither of us are wrong for enjoying that, but we just have to you have to make a conscious effort to not let the environment become all one thing or all the other, because again, then you're leaving people behind and people will get disgruntled and leave. And again, when you start shedding players from the community, that's when your community shrinks and then starts to fold in on itself, and then you can actually risk losing the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you guys just did was it on Facebook? You did a poll asking, you know, do you want to have one big tournament where everybody's in the same brackets, or do you want to have multiple tournaments, like a more competitive and a friendly version? And the friendly version came out, you know, like 80%.
Oh yeah, the results really actually surprised me. I was sure it'd be more like a 50-50, you know, like that, because, you know, some people want to see just big events, and we definitely did have people, including some good friends of mine, who voted that yes, we would just like to have one big event, whether it's because they just want to see an event grow, or one person brought up the logistics of running 2 side-by-side events, which, to be fair, is a concern. Although I will point out the fact that Matt Root ran the 40k friendly at LVO with just himself, and that was a 64-person event. And by the nature of a friendly event, it's really hands off for the most part. So, you know, that's a thing to bring up. But yeah, I was really surprised how overwhelming the support was for, having a friendly style event running side by side with a competitive. So there's definitely a huge audience for it. So I would encourage more events, once you get over a certain size, to have that as an option, because obviously people want to do it, and a lot of people probably do want to have that as the alternative to, again, like, I don't want to play in the beat face tournament, but I do want to get multiple games in. Best of both worlds.
Yeah, and one thing I do wonder about that is, there's part of me that sees both sides as being attractive. I would, if there's one giant tournament, yeah, let's get into that and see how well I do. I'm not going to be at the top. Hopefully I'm not at the bottom. Hopefully I'm somewhere in the middle. But and then if I'm offered a friendly version, part of my brain says, well, maybe I'll have a better chance of getting towards the top in the friendly version. And I wonder how big of an impact that has on people's preference for a friendly tournament. If they're like, yeah, there's going to be friendly, so I'm going to bring the beat stick list to the friendly and be that guy.
And I think part of that is the friendly format itself. Like at LVO, your score, your win-loss record was 1/3 of your score. So even if you brought a beat face list, well, if it's an ugly beat face list as far as like the hobby side, and you didn't really have a coherent theme, yeah, you might get the best general award, but you're not going to get anywhere near best overall for it, because the friendly has more to it than that. And also the fact that like the scoring on the friendly was, as opposed to like an ITC champs event where it's like the scores might be as high as like 40 some points for a winner. If you go all 5 rounds, five or 6 turns, it's like, did you win? 3 points. Did you lose? 1 point? Did you tie? 2 points? That's it. I mean, so there's not even a lot of granularity. So at the end of 4 rounds, there were like 8 people tied for best. So, it's not a format where if you're going for gunning for the top, it's really not what that event is made for. So, and that's one of those things that you just have to be clear about that, when you're setting up the expectations for people. So it's like, yeah, you're only, yeah, you may brought the beat face list. That doesn't really mean anything in this event. That's not the point of this event. So you just have to be clear with people up front.
Yeah, I just played in an event called Con of the North. It's in the same building as Renegade was in this past year. And I'll give a shout out to Nate Williams, who organizes that.
Oh, Nate's awesome. Nate's a great guy.
Yeah, Nate's awesome. And he organized it in a very similar way, where your battle score is only, I think it's like 1/3 of your overall performance. So it kind of manipulating the perception of importance of battle score versus these other factors, sportsmanship and painting or hobby, does kind of help manipulate the player base into valuing other things besides game performance.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting how much shifting that just, one way or another can really change how people approach the game. And again, I'm not saying either side is better than the other. I personally find myself preferring the friendly, because that's where I've had more fun than I have had. I mean, not that I have had a bad time playing competitive 40k, for example, at Renegade, but playing at the LVO friendly was just like, that's what I've been looking for. That's the flavor of event I want. But they both have value to it. But yeah, it's being, again, by shaping the expectation, shaping the scoring a little bit, you can come up with a wildly different event that fits an entirely different audience. And I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is where, if it was a not a live recording, I would cut, because totally forgot what I was going to say.
You'd be surprised how much ends up on the cutting room floor of us either pausing, stumbling over words, or flipping through codexes, trying to answer this question or that question, or find just the right rules interpretation.
Well, I guess I lost it, so I don't know where it went. But we're kind of running a little long, so we talk about Tau a lot on this channel, and one of the things, the last thing I wanted to ask you about is what you think is going to be coming around the corner in the next month or two when the Tau Codex is released. As far as, are there stratagems that you think are low-hanging fruit that you're probably going to see in there? What are the big changes you might expect? Stuff like that.
Let's see. I'm definitely expecting to see something akin to some of those old formation perks come back as stratagems. So, like for example, Wall of Mirrors. I would not be surprised if we see some sort of ghost keel and stealth suit stratagem that key off of each other. I don't know if we'll quite. I imagine we'll see some Riptide stratagems that kind of give you that Riptide wing feel without actually being full on easy mode Riptide wing. Definitely, more than anything, what I would really like to see out of it is a codex that supports multiple builds, and I think part of it, sept traits will go a long way towards that, and just some reworking of points and limitations. I've seen some rumors running around of possibly like one commander per detachment or something like that, which it's kind of a heavy-handed fix, but right now there's only one build that seems competitive with Tau, and that is commanders and drones. And it can be effective, but it's, as somebody who's played Tau since 2007, it's not a build that feels really interesting. I really tend to enjoy a more mixed force, and like I loved, even though Wall of Mirrors is no longer around, I still love Ghost Keels and Stealth Suits. And anything that gives you a -1 to be hit is always good. And so I enjoy that build, and I'd like to see some more stuff that supports that. But I'd also like to see stuff that supports more use of strike squads. I want to see hammerheads on the table more. I want to see sky rays. They got to figure out something to do with sky rays because they're not quite hitting it right now. Riptides obviously need some work point wise or something to make them really click. I mean, there's a lot of things that they can do, but I think that the biggest change I hope to see is, just supporting multiple builds, kind of the way that like Tyranids, I think, is a codex that I think really hit it out of the park with the Hive fleet adaptations, really changing up how you build an army, with all of them being viable to some extent. And I'd like to see the same kind of thing with Tau.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sky rays, kind of the one thing that would really make them just not the bottom of the barrel for the current selection is like a one command point stratagem to refill your seeker missiles. Like, that's all you need. It'd be a simple fix. It means you can't take unlimited seeker missiles. It doesn't make one seeker missile do 2d6 mortal wounds or anything like that. And I think that would be somewhere in the ballpark of a reasonable fix for them. But for the strategy, or for the sept traits, a lot of, so like for Tyranids, for example, Tyranids can play in every phase of the game. And this is one of the reasons why playing as Tyranids can be so slow. It's not necessarily just the model count that you have. It's that you have to move them, you have to shoot them, you have to psychic phase, you have to melee, you do everything in the game with them. And so that provides an opportunity for different Hive fleet traits to manipulate each of those different phases in different ways. So I mean, you have Kronos that does shooting and psychic, and you have Kraken and Behemoth that do charging, and so there's lots of different opportunities for Tyranids to have Hive fleet traits that act in unique and flavorful ways. For Tau, we got one phase, or two phases, I guess, and maybe
movement and shooting is pretty much
right.
it.
Right, and maybe 3 if you bring back thrust moves, which I think is dubious at best. But so you have movement and shooting, and so within those you have to find new ways to differentiate the septs. And so I think probably the most likely outcome is that they use the different unit types to differentiate the septs, as opposed to using different play styles, which are somewhat related, but not necessarily as distinct as with like the Tyranids. So something like having a crisis suit specialized sept, which would probably be Farsight Enclaves, and then something with stealth teams and ghost keels, and something with riptides, and something with fire warriors or hammerheads. you know, it seems like you could group those things together, and to some extent they have with the faction keywords in the index, right? Like long strike and is Tau sept only. So
Right.
you know, I think there's some play in there, but I don't know exactly what those things would be.
Well, I imagine what we're gonna see. I'm at like I think you'll see things like Viorla uh, supporting a more aggressive playstyle. I mean, something that maybe more moving and shooting, or I imagine you could actually see a melee build if like I could see Farsight Enclaves actually providing some bonus to weapon skill or something like that. Um, the other thing that we're really suffering from right now is there's you mentioned Tyranids playing in all 4 phases of the game, and we only get 2, and the problem is one of those is the psychic phase, and we don't have any psychic defense whatsoever. And while I would not be surprised if we see the Arthas Moloch talisman back for as a Farsight Enclave only support system or relic or however they're going to list it, um, 1 is not enough. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some sort of stratagem that keys off of that, and maybe even keys off of an ethereal to make an ethereal kind of a faux psyker for the purposes of denying, but costs you 1 or 2 command points to burn. Let's see. But I mean that's one of the big problems. And the other thing is other than drones, one of the reasons drones are so popular is we have no other answer to mortal wounds. And of course, a lot of armies have that problem. Some of them can make up for it by just having more bodies to absorb it, or having psychers. Although as more things come out, like Death Guard or some of the Tyranid units that can just put out mortal wounds just by being around, even psychic defense becomes less and less important. So if we can, find some way to get more feel no pain style effects in, and granted, we have stim injectors, which go a long way towards helping, but that will get expensive really fast if you have to load every suit, and that cuts into your other support systems that you can use, of course. So having some sort of answer to that doesn't necessarily mean leaning on drones as a total crutch all the time would also go a long way towards providing more flexibility, because if that's something you don't have to worry about as much, or maybe you have to bring this unit or that unit to kind of give bubbles of that or something like that, I mean, that could help. Now, do I think that's necessarily going to happen or that's going to be in there? I wish I could say one way or another, but I think that's where I see like the real deficiencies for the army. I mean, I'm fine with the army being weak in melee. That's kind of on flavor. That's our thing. Psychic makes sense. Tau aren't supposed to have a real presence in the warp, although I'd kind of like to see that, that they've never quite hit on that in any edition of the game, but one would think not having much of a presence in the warp would actually maybe make it harder for us to be hit with psychic powers. But again, I'm not sure that, other than raising the warp charge number for psychic powers targeting us, but of course you don't target until after you've cast it successfully. So the mechanics of that get messy too. So just figuring out the right way to hit that. But those are the main weaknesses. And then again, just points cost revisions. I don't think we're going to see a wholesale reworking of the army like what they're talking about for Necrons. I mean, Necrons is an army that really needs it. But Tau is something where I think, like a lot of armies these days, with the right stratagems, they can be it could be really effective. I mean, obviously, like just the marker light stratagem from Chapter Approved has made a huge difference in how marker lights can be used, and just makes those options a lot more effective. I mean, 1 unit of Pathfinders can suddenly load somebody with 5 marker light hits, and then you're golden. So, so just things like that. I think stratagems are where they're really going to hit it. And fortunately, unlike a lot of the Space Marine related chapters, we don't have to share like a dozen or more stratagems between multiple armies like the way Blood Angels and Dark Angels do. We'll have 2 to 3 pages of just new options for us, which I think gives us a lot of room for improvement that could come with that.
Yeah, one thing that I think they could do, and I don't know if it's likely or not, but when when we transitioned from having to pay for multi-trackers and black sun filters on suits to having those automatically included, that was a huge deal back in, what was that, 6th edition when that codex hit. And I could see them potentially doing something similar this time around, where all suits have a black light or black sun filter built in, where maybe you ignore modifiers to hit or something like that. I mean, that seems
that could be huge. Although I'm concerned about what that would do for game balance, considering what we're seeing with like Dark Reapers right now. That's a very powerful ability. Now, one benefit we do have, and it would kind of hurt us in some ways, because one of the reasons the Dark Reapers are so good is because they're already also hitting you on 3s and having no penalties whatsoever. Most of our stuff hits on 4s, so ignoring those minuses might not be as bad, but I'd be more likely to see just like ignoring the -1 from cover. That I think that would be kind of a balance where it's like, yeah, if you're like Ally Talk and you have a -1 to be hit from more than 12 inches away, yeah, well, Black Sun Filter is not going to help you in that regard, but it might help against that unit of Rangers that is getting an extra benefit from cover in that building. Well, now they don't, and you can still reach out and touch somebody.
Yeah, and I agree with you that the problem with one of the things that's challenging about Dark Reapers is that static hit profile, and certain things like maybe burst cannons, it wouldn't be as big of a deal because it doesn't have the damage characteristic, but assuming that doesn't change, and I doubt it would, but maybe something like missile pods or plasma rifles or cyclic ion blasters or fusion blasters, any of those things always hitting on 4s would be a bit rough. And then when you put marker lights on top of that, that'd be a pretty big pill to swallow for a lot of people.
Yeah, it would be. But then it also means, those things that have marker lights, target them first, which is how it used to be. So that's not necessarily a bad thing if you have these and most of the units that provide marker lights are either they're squishier, like Pathfinders are, or they're like drones where they're not terribly accurate unless there's a drone controller nearby. So or that might also be a place where the Skyray gets useful again, is as a marker light platform that's a little bit more durable.
Well, that's how I used to use the Skyray is for a velocity tracker, Skyfire marker light battery, and now it can't even do that. So maybe if there's some way that they could bring that functionality back, that would almost be enough just to bring it for that reason. But all right, so we're running a long time. Okay. Last question, one-word answer. How long do you think it will be until we see a Kroot Codex?
Ooh, at least a year. At least a year. I think that's when we're going to get to start getting those small sub-faction codexes. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's coming.
Yeah, I'm excited. So any last words to the viewers, I guess?
Just anybody who's has listened to the show, we're really happy to have all the listeners we have. Anybody who hasn't, we definitely invite you to check it out. And again, just like I said earlier, our mission is just to continue growing the hobby, growing the community. And if you're doing the things that do that, whether it's starting up a club, running events for people, even something as simple as doing a paint night for new players who have no idea where to get started, stuff like that is awesome. It helps build the community, and we're 100% behind you on doing that. So we encourage people to keep stepping up and helping grow the 40k community.
Awesome. Well, Rob, thanks for putting out great content, and
thank you.
And everyone else, thanks for watching, and of course, happy wargaming.
Happy wargaming.